Welcome to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I'm your host, Dean Anderson, and on today's show, we have mental health and addiction advocate, John Swales. Hi, John.
How are you doing?
Wonderful.
Good.
I'm happy to have you here. We've had the opportunity to interact over the last many years, I think, back and forth and kind of being in the same circles. And your name comes up a lot, like when I'm doing the work I'm doing and engaging. And most recently, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he says, "You know what? You need to have John Swales on the show. That's a guy you need to have." And I thought, you know what? You're right. You're right. So your advocacy work and your the things that you do kind of precede you. And I would just, love to hear some more about some of the things that, you've been doing over the years that, and I know there's some peer support and some advocacy and things like that you've been doing, but I'd love to hear about what you got going on and what you're doing.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We can delve into that. Mm-hmm. And I would think part of the subject matter is finding out, where I was, what my life was.
Sure.
I think that because I'm not always, I don't always present as a non-addict person. There was a time in my life where I lived much differently than I do today. And, then, it was what it's like, what happened, and what life is like today. Is basically the essence of my story. So, so, who am I? That's a good question because I ask myself that every morning when I wake up. However,
it's a pretty deep question.
Well, it is a deep question.
Yeah.
Now, when I think about where I've been in my life, I think about some of the, I was sexually abused at a young age, at the age of 10, by a Roman Catholic priest. In London. As a matter of fact, I was driving in this morning and I drove by the church where it happened. So, where it happened, where the initial acts happened. And, I thought about my life trajectory since then, and it's comes full circle. I've gone to the point where I've been a person that's lashing out and recoiling from the acts of, the precipitators of addiction, if you will. And then I look at where I am today, and it's so dramatically far removed from where I once was. So I'm not sure that, and I lose myself in the conversation sometimes because it almost feels like I'm talking third party about another individual, somebody who once lived that doesn't live anymore. I actually was a pretty hardcore IV drug user. I used substances that I like stimulants and things of that nature that I don't know that I actually worked a meaningful job until I got married. And when I think about marriage, I think about some of the chaos that I brought to the situation, and just horrific is the best way I would use to describe it. I've worked with, when I thought about when I was in early active addiction, I was often thinking about things such as, how will I find my next big score? And, many of the things that addicts think about that, I was always looking for the easy way, the softer and easier way.
So, instant gratification, for what means? Why the easier, softer way?
Well, when I look back, so I need to go back and say that I'm the oldest of a sibling of 6 people. I'm my life was relatively normal up until the point where got into substances, and I was sexually abused. I remember things such as the priest would say to me, you know, I would have conversations with him about substances that I was at. I was at a party, for example. I remember a conversation I had with him. I was at a party and they had bowls of acid. Well, it was BS, frankly. But he said, well, you know, that's how it is, you know. And he was more interested in procuring his entertainment, which I was on the menu. So. When I fast forwarded the tape, and I have to go through a lot of years of chaos and turbulence and you know, I guess I really wanted to say that make no mistakes about it, and that I was an actual addict, and that was something that I lived fully and richly. When I got into school, which is many, many years later, I was probably 60 when I started school. I got into school and I started thinking about, I thought I knew so much about addiction, but then the light went on. I don't know nothing about addiction.
So you said something earlier when you first started talking about, you know, being kind of removed from that person that you used to be, and kind of looking back on it like a third person. I've heard that before, in the sense of, and I don't want to make it a Christian thing, but the idea of being born again, of having a new identity and a different life, so that there's a part that's removed from that. What would you attribute to that causing that?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't want to delve too far into spirituality, but I consider myself agnostic today. But I think about some of the differences and the learning curve that I've been on. You know, like I accept wherever anyone is at on their life's journey, and I think that's really important for me to recognize that some Muslims and Christians and Sikhs and so on and so forth, I don't get to choose what they believe in. But I get to support them and be a friend to them, an ally, if you will. So I think that that's really important for me to.
I agree. I think that we all have our own individualism and we all have our own needs and faith, and that's part of, I think, the recovery process for anyone, regardless of whether it's mental health addiction or even physical whatever. I'm more curious less about the spiritual side, and maybe what attributed for you to be able to make that big of a change in your life, to make it so you could look back. Because I think what happens, or at least I recognize, John, is a lot of people in early recovery, they think that that's the end goal. I'm going to get to a place where I look back on my past and it's not even me anymore, and I'm just completely turned off from it, which most of the time we're trying to teach people that that's probably not going to happen, and it will take some time and a lot of work to get there. And I'm wondering, what is it, if anything, that you can recognize that contributed to you be able to look back at that as almost a third party?
Well, I know that what I did, frankly, for my recovery and my healing from addiction or substance use, was that I once, every week I would go to a meeting. I belonged to a fellowship in London. And so I'd go to a meeting and I would I would take one concept from that meeting and I'd work on it. Then I'd go back next week and I'd secure another concept, another thought. And I would just keep putting it through. And all of a sudden I looked up one day and I had a number of years clean. So, and I'm not sure that I'm really answering your question, what attributed to, the change. I think it was slow, it was gradual, and I think that I really started to look at who I was and where I was going in life. I mean, frankly, I was, and you know, it's one of the drawbacks of getting older. I think about the people that I used with. And frankly, other than one or two of them, most of them people that I used with are dead today, you know, and they didn't stop. So, and so I guess maybe fear was a big factor for me. You know, I just didn't want to end up dying, not having never lived. You know, and that's an interesting Johnny Winters song. I think it's Johnny Winters, but he says dying to live or living to die, and it's like, you know, I've heard that, and I thought about it, and I thought, Jesus, I'm not even alive yet, so I wanted to live, and that really, you know, and then there's so many things, so many aspects of my recovery. I've got into homelessness, and I recently was working at the Arcade Street Mission in London, and as I was working there, I realized the similarities between the community members and myself are very, very clear. I mean, I actually knew quite a few people in attendance that were, but for the grace of God, there go I. And that's something that may resonate for some of the people in the audience, but you know, but for the grace of God, there go I. So, you know, it is just as a fluke that I didn't end up where they are, and it's by vigilance and pursuing, you know, who I am, that has kept me on the clean and narrow, the straight and narrow. You know, so I've, you know, I've vacillated between homelessness and mental health addiction, you know, because my opinion is this: if you're using substances, you're already afflicted with a mental health issue, challenge. I've heard it said that, you know, when I think about substance, I was asked by David Wolf one day. He said to me, "Well, I don't deal with addictions so much. I deal with mental health." And I said, "David," because I knew David quite well at that point. I said, "David, this is mental health, or addiction is mental health. I mean, there's no soft way to sell it. I mean, if I did, I mean, I can remember in the heights of addiction, injecting rubbing alcohol into my veins. It's like, what? That's a little bit out there. That's not something that a rational, not by my perceptions today.
Not a person without mental health would do. Yeah.
Sure. So
I get that.
Yeah.
So, John, we're going to cut to a quick break. I've got a whole line of questioning and so much stuff, and you've, you know, opened up some doors to some pretty serious conversations and some big topics, and we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk more about that stuff.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. And again, we have John Swales, mental health and addiction advocate. John, right before we went to break, you had mentioned something about addiction and mental health being intertwined or the same thing. And I want to, you know, kind of pull that apart a little bit, because I think that there's that addiction seems to have its own nuancy subset of things, whereas addiction is, I don't want to say it's a choice, because I think that's a bad selection of words, but it seems to be that there's a, you know, an outside influence of the substance, whereas mental health is something that's internal and it comes from whatever. There's all of these different nuancy things. So I want to pick it apart a little bit, because I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I do recognize that there are nuanced treatments and different things for mental health versus addiction, but they kind of live in the same camp.
Well, I don't know that we're going to be able to wrap it up today.
As succinct as possible.
Well, so I think that mental health and addiction are so strongly intertwined that they're you can't have one without the other.
Okay.
Simply put.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking about. Well, when I talked about injecting rubbing alcohol, that's pretty out there, And and I think about the conversation I had with David Wolf, where I said, I think that mental health and addiction are one and the same. I think about Raphael, I think his name is Raphael Bellien, but he was an advocate for harm reduction, who died of a heroin overdose. I mean, in spite of our best intentions, we succumb to mental health addictions or mental health afflictions.
Do you think that there's any barrier to those people that might have mild or moderate substance use disorders? Because, when you talk about, very overt, hey, me, injecting something like that is very overtly, hey, there must be a mental health problem here, where I think that we have a lot of, for lack of better words, I'll say low-grade, mild, moderate substance use disorders, cannabis, weekend alcoholics, and they don't want to identify as a mental health disorder. Is there a stigma that's preventing care when we make it mental health?
There may well be. I'm not so sure that this is something that I'll think about and ponder about.
Okay.
But it's funny because I was thinking that when I go back I ran a garage in London here, and I remember somebody leaving NA literature constantly, but I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready to accept that I had a mental health issue, or that I was a substance use issue.
Sure.
So I didn't really look at either one of them. So I think I've heard it said something about when the teachers when the student's ready, the teacher will be there. Yeah.
So it's a subjective. So each person's going to be their own in that.
Yeah, somewhat subjective. I mean, what I've learned is that what I don't like. I don't like the word addict because it's problematic to me. I don't like the word. I don't like various little catchphrases, and I think about trauma often, and when I think about the trauma, I hear people say, "Well, that's no excuse." Well, it may be an excuse, and there may be a good reason for your behavior. So, sometimes the water's too deep, and we just need to ride through to get to the other side.
Right. I think that's a good segue, John. I would like to talk briefly, and I know that you're an advocate for, sexual abuse towards men, and the work that you're doing, and you've already, opened the door to talk about that. But, with the little amount of time we have, I'm wondering if you could help draw a line from how those things that happened when you were younger associate to mental health addiction, because we are learning more and more every day that there's a true impact on our mental health from those adverse childhood experiences. And I was wondering if you could draw a line to how that impacted your addiction. And
well, I'm going to try to be quick and say that
it's a big question. I'll cut you off if we're running out of time. You go ahead.
Yeah, well, so I think that substance abuse and early trauma, childhood trauma, is subjective. again, I don't know that it's any different for a woman to be abused or a man to be abused, or a non-binary, or yeah, I don't know how it's impacted. What I do know is that it is absolutely the most critical for the person carrying the trauma. So that there's.
Do you mind sharing how that trauma impacted you in your substance use?
Absolutely.
Specifically?
So I remember, I was like a light switch. I remember smoking a bit of weed and doing a bit of LSD, and then I graduated to methamphetamine. So, I quickly gravitated to a lifestyle that was not healthy for me. That certainly was not the case, but it didn't matter. I continued that lifestyle for 20 lost years. When I heard it through the court case, and I sued the Catholic Church ultimately and the perpetrator of the abuse, but when I went through my lawyer, Paul Ladois, said to me, "Those are your 20 lost years." And I thought about it, and I thought, you're right. They are 20 lost years that I will never get back, and that they're kind of lost in the vortex of my mind. I mean, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I kind of, and I'm not sure I'm directly answering the question.
Yeah, I can see where there would be that, kind of lost time and the impacts that it would have, and of course, how that would be turbulent, thinking about, the way that the legal system, was an impact as well. My question was, more of a direct line, like how did trauma make me use drugs? Like what's the quickest way to say, I had a trauma and it impacted, how did the trauma create the 20 years of drug use? If you're comfortable with
Well,
that.
no, I'm comfortable. It's a good question, because I can sum it up this way. I remember talking to a girlfriend one time, and she said to me, my brother said to me something, that you are an angry man. And I think about the anger that the early childhood abuse infused in me, led me to bohemian behavior, that substance use and being angry. Anger was an elixir that created a lot of social stigmas for me.
In the work that I do, we recognize that anger is purposeful. It's not a bad emotion. It's how I decide to use the emotion. But it's a very purposeful emotion for self-protection and for whatever. But there's a lot of times when we draw a line to say that there's something underneath the anger. There's something that builds up to the anger. Do you have any reflection on?
Well, I remember one time when the police came to my house, and they were talking to me about the perpetrator. And I loved the priest, frankly. And I remember phoning him, and I never heard from him again. I never ever heard from him until I was in court many years later, and I served him paperwork, actually. But I remember feeling that an immense pain of, and it just being candid, I loved the man, and what he said to me, and he said, "Don't worry, John, just take care of yourself." And that was the last time I talked to him. So he said,
Yeah. That's a very, unconventional grieving, I think, to say that, somebody that you cared about, and then you love the person, but then you have to separate yourself from that person, and then I could see society not wanting to give you permission to grieve that either, because how dare you ever grieve someone who hurt you, and that's must be extremely difficult.
Well, it was, and you know, I think about the lawyers and the participants, not just in my trial, but I worked as an advocate, you know, with other survivors of sexual violence, and I remember them standing there and talking about how, you know, we're grateful that the perpetrator is going to, you know, be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at the person that I was supporting, and I said, "So how do you feel?" He said, "They'll kill him in jail."
Mm-hmm.
So he shared the similar feelings that I did.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Cornwall, Ontario, way back in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a person speaking, and he got white and he left. And Albert Lalonde, I'll never forget Albert. And his wife called and she said, "John, I wanted to let you know that Albert talked to me, and he wanted you to know that if you never ever have another moment in your life where you've impacted somebody, you impacted him tonight." Mm. He never thought that somebody else would feel the same way that you do about their perpetrator. And he wanted to thank you for expressing that. And that's, you know, because I had told Albert, I said, "Look, I loved my perpetrator." And it's a common theme. It's a common ideation, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, how the hell would you let some priest get into your life that far without having concern and care?
Yeah. So that brings us into an end, John, and I appreciate your vulnerability and you sharing, and that's a big topic, and that is something that is, you know, kind of outside of the regular for people to wrap their head around. So I hope that everybody heard the message today and recognize that there is hope. You can stand up for yourself. There's other things that we can do to reach out and connect and participate in our own survival after having these things. And it's okay to have conflicting emotions, to feel hurt and love at the same time. So that's a big topic, John. So I really appreciate you doing that. But we have to call it an end for today. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. We'll see you next time.